Namibia. Hopefully my audio's okay. I'm going to get a sound check here while I'm at it. I know these are still relatively primitive podcasts compared to what we're hoping to do with kind of a studio appearance. And there's a lot of things like that with Concentric that are going to continue to get more and more refined as we go. And what I'm excited about with all this is that the substance of this organization has never wavered. And some of the outward appearances or the financial standing certainly is the item, the hot topic of the day. And we're going to address some of those things again because I'm there. There's a fine line between getting wrapped around the wheel over negative criticism, and the other is addressing it and resolving it. And in the case of Concentric Industries, even one of the reasons we're here on YouTube as opposed to some of the channels is that talk is cheap and talk isn't cheap, right? And there's a lot of greenwashing around the world. There's a lot of things that go on that are um, they sound good, and there's a lot of things in the world that people have expectations like, well, if this is the way this is the way I want it to be, so it has to be this way, that really don't make sense. And it's why people get disappointed. And it's why infrastructure is failing. And it's why there's challenges in the nations. And one of the things we talk about a lot are that there's problems and then there's solutions, right? There's producers and there's takers. There's good versus evil. You know, you can kind of break things down a lot into, the two sides. And it doesn't mean you have to be polar, but sometimes that simplifies things, right? And that's kind of what's happened with Concentric is that especially this post-pandemic window, and I'm going to talk about Africa here in a minute where I am, because it's pretty exciting to see what's happening and what the mindset is. And I want to talk about that because there are this kind of post-pandemic thing where the world kind of fell behind, and we're kind of now watching some parts of the world catch up and some not. And the mindset that seems to prevail, I'll put it this way, that people in the end do what they want to do bad enough. And if they think it's okay or they're convinced that it's okay or that it can't be better, they're not really well grounded or well receptive to change. And one of the things that I think has caused some of these, it's kind of an exciting adventure, but the story of Concentric, this early stage renaissance, and it's kind of going to blow past this. So it's sort of a topic to just mention now as a frame of reference. But this whole thing that it's as if getting work financed has a deadline. And I take responsibility that I allowed the people who are managing, I'm addressing the token. I'm going to address the token right now. You guys know the story. We're on our fourth one. Uh, there's still people who debate over whether to buy it or what's going on. And when you debate those things about the token, you're missing the point of this whole company. That's what we've been trying to say all along. This whole organization is not about if we get funding next Thursday, it goes forward, and if we don't, it's just done and goes away. Okay, it's not. It's never been like that. It's kind of like this. See, life. Baseball. Those of you who know baseball, you get three strikes and you're out, right? And then three outs and it's the end of the inning. 9 innings later, unless it's a tie game, the game's over. But see, life isn't like that. Life isn't like, okay, you have till next Tuesday to get corporate financing or else the company shuts down. You have to find ways, obviously, to keep the doors open and stay alive. And we've done that. And we're continuing to do that. And with the help of some key investors, we're expanding, continue to expand. And we continue to challenge anyone in the world to take the seeds we planted in Oman, the seeds that we planted in Georgia, the seeds we planted in Central Asia, the seeds we planted in Southeast Asia, the seeds we planted way back, going way back in the United States, There's nobody who's developed what we've developed ever. And we can talk about all the topics, and I could sit and talk all day about the engineering sciences, and they're so profoundly simple. But what it boils down to, the missing link, the final piece of this whole equation is finding people who believe. And, there's a lot of talk about faith. See, right? Faith is the evidence of things hoped for, right? The hope for things, the hope and the evidence of things not yet seen. And yet people say, show me, Missouri, the show me state. And that's okay. But the thing is that when you're grounded on good science and good principles and good logic, like people need energy, food, air, and water, then you don't really have to stretch it all very far. And what's happening, this is the profound thing that's taking place. And you guys know a little bit of the story here, and I'm going to get into the meat and potatoes of what we're going to talk about tonight. We talk, me talk, not you guys, I guess. And I'm going to try to watch the channel here. I'll keep an eye here on WhatsApp and what have you. But less than a week ago, uh, or was it a week ago? Yeah, about a week. No, it really has been less than a week because Saturday night. Yeah, so it's almost exactly a week right now when we really got settled here into Windhoek. And so in that 1 week time frame, I can tell you this, I talked about Africa. I read Ernest Hemingway as a youngster, um, watched the various films. Most of what we consider Africa from the West is kind of that Great Rift Valley, Kenya. I find it interesting that the Serengeti and Mount Kilimanjaro are actually both in Tanzania, and yet we associate it with Kenya and that Great Rift Valley. That really the Great Rift Valley, the Arabic word Araba, actually means rift, and that's where that word comes from in Arabic. And the rift goes all the way up through the Dead Sea on up to Syria. You can look it up. If you look up the Great Rift Valley, it says from Syria to Mozambique, actually. And so that stretch through Kenya and Uganda and Tanzania, Ethiopia is kind of a iconic spot in it, but it's still just a spot. The Red Sea is really part of it. And I know that people have said that no matter how much you read about it and look at it and everything, the sheer scale of that rift of the Serengeti is always kind of breathtaking or breath giving. And I can tell you firsthand right now, Talita and I just saw a sunset here, and we're in Windhoek, kind of up, and we're over a mile high in the hills above the Namib Desert. And I can tell you that seeing that sunset from here, um, Africa is different. The scale is mammoth. And I'm saying some of this because I'm here. And, finally, what do they say that, life, the travel is a way to read the world. The world is a book and you read it by traveling. I'm really excited because we've just arrived. We've had some excellent meetings and finding some traction. And what I'm ultimately getting at here is a mindset that is liberating a lot because the missing link with Concentric Industries isn't something extraordinarily profound. It's just people and nations acknowledging that they need energy, they need food, they need to do something different. And what's been fascinating to me is there's very little infrastructure expansion, even in the north and the west in America. And you see a lot of knee-jerk reactions come around. Finally, we're going to shell $700 million into some coal works as if that's really what the traction needed. It's sort of like throwing a band-aid on a gushing wound. You don't take a band-aid and try to cover up a puncture wound that's just gushing out blood. And that's kind of what's going on in places. And I think my late father said a great thing. He always taught me and my brothers. He said, always remember how to count, right? People say, oh, that's a lot of something. Well, is it? Learn how to count and how to scale things. Because you see a lot of environmentalists come around and say, oh, this is terrible. This aluminum smelter, or this place, they use X amount of megawatts or kilowatts or gallons or liters or whatever. And they just sling these big numbers around like they're just some kind of beastly devourer of everything. And they don't realize that No, those are also the producers of other goods, and the refining isn't, in fact, refining things is good. And like a guy said recently, and I champion it too, pollution is an engineering error. So let's engineer the fix for it. You don't throw the baby out with the bathwater all around. And so what that is you just find better ways of doing things and converting waste into valuable resources. And we've talked through that. But what I want to share, especially here about Africa, that's pretty fascinating. I'm going to share one project in particular uh, that, sorry, I just heard something there. And it's Africa is amazing. And I'll tell you why is that there's a mindset here that the people, and Namibia is peaceful. I know there's stressful spots. I mean, just below us in South Africa, people are running the streets, blowing stuff up as if that's going to solve things. It's incredible what people do sometimes. Like, how is genocide going to fix anything? Like the attitude that we'll just kill half the population and then somehow we'll all have more. I mean, it's really kind of twisted. And yet, how, is it really different when you just sort of suppress another group, or Russia going at Ukraine, or Ukraine going to, right? All these conflicts, and why? And there's a time for every season, and sometimes you do need to fight. And when you're oppressed, and we've certainly been through enough of those things. But I think when you catch up with life and what people are trying to do, and you see a place, even catch a smattering of it. We've studied it, obviously. Some of you seen the map of Africa that we have, the interactive map, and we have it really for the whole world now. By default, I did the Southeast Asia one to get ready for an Indian investor over there who wants kind of the whole ball of wax. And then the last pieces are the Americas. We have thousands of our units and hundreds of projects, and we're kind of working on these interactive maps so we can get back where we used to be with interactive projects. You go on the website and look them up. And what I mean is you open up a PDF file and you just click on the map, and there's linked and encoded in it, the file that brings you out to the proposal that's been made for the proposal that's been made for uh, the country or nation, that's involved in what we're talking about. And so it's exciting because we've now modeled over half the countries in the world. I think it's almost like 120 or something. So when people call now and say, "Hey, so and so, we've got the connection with the president or the prime minister or the minister of energy or the minister of finance or whatever," and they're looking for some solutions on what could you do for this country, you know how long it takes us now to get some of that material to them? Literally, like less than 10 minutes. We just fine tune it. We copy and send the link, and here it is, because we're ready, and we've applied our modular sciences and all these other things to that, and it's pretty awesome when you can do that. Thank you, Talita. And so what I'm getting at is that, and this is one of the most profound things I'd seen before. We got here, and thanks to some awesome allies and agents we have up in West Africa. We're in Southwest Africa, but West Africa is typically refers to kind of south of Morocco and maybe down to Congo, but really more like Senegal area, more, Cameroon, I should say, more than Senegal. Senegal's up surrounding the Gambia, but more like kind of Cameroon to Morocco. Okay, is sort of West Africa, and it's kind of cool where we are here in the Southwest. It's kind of its own no man's land, especially. I can't say enough good already about Namibia and Botswana. And I'm going to talk about them in just a second, because this is a place where these nations are, they're at a point where doing nothing, they know, is not an option. And that's what makes me kind of sad for the North and the West, and whatever you want to call Europe and America, is that somehow, some way, the option of doing nothing has become really attractive there, as if populations aren't growing, or that everything, everyone's just, they just want everything to be okay. But see, life isn't a still shot, right? Life isn't about resting. And I think when people, when, if what you're doing is just such a drag that all you want to do is take a break by doing nothing, be careful. because that's not really the purpose of life. No, if you're unsettled because you want life to be better, what we said that before, if things aren't well and you just complain about them, it's called being a jerk. But if you go out and come up with an answer to make things better, that's what love is. Okay. And so when you look at things and say, wow, this culture needs stuff, they need some infrastructure, they need things, we're going to go work for that and do everything with it and make things happen. That's what love is. You get involved and you get in the trenches to try to work with and help people. And you do it for a profit so that those profits can move around and do more. And there's some really fascinating things that happen. It has to do, I mentioned scale and I mentioned work scope. And what I'm going to mention are just a few key things that took place because the we've met with some partners and developers down here that kind of came to us, and we've built some of these relationships over several years. And that's what opens the door where then all of a sudden a new relationship arises, and the people that know each other can make a quick phone call, and within 2 hours you're having very specific, honed in, refined conversations about some of these developments, whether it's a power plant, waste to energy, waste conversion, and I'm going to talk about a rail line again. And I really want to talk about that, especially and kind of devote some of this episode to that because I'll put it this way. If you've not read Atlas Shrugged, go read it, or at least get a Cliff Notes or do something. Actually, some pretty neat movies were made of it. It's not a perfect book. I don't agree with everything Ayn Rand ever wrote about, but I agree with a lot of what she wrote about. Anthem's still my favorite book of hers, and the Rush did their album 2112 on the same theme. It was anti-utopian where it was a controlled society. And in the book, a man discovers electricity and the society squelches him. It's a very brief book. The album 2112, they kind of spun it where the man discovers music and a guitar. And it's a pretty neat story. And it's about, the individual against a controlling society. And there's just something about that theme that just kind of resonates across the ages. And I bring that up because the book Atlas Shrugged, the thematic topic, the storyline in it was about a train line, the John Galt line, and some of the entrepreneurs with the Reardon metal and different things going on around it. And so there's sort of that, and then the Fountainhead was another great book of hers. And there's been films made, old ones and new ones and stuff. These were written in the 50s, I think. And then, Jimmy Stewart, I think, was in the original film of the Fountainhead. And I don't know if they've made a new great story though. Those were kind of her two marquee novels. A little pitch on Ayn Rand. There's also I mentioned Anthem. There's a great play, The Night of January 16th. If you haven't read it, go read that. That's a great play. And I guess that was a Broadway hit too, back in more like in the 30s and 40s, maybe even the 20s, because the deal was the storyline had a jury that would make a decision on this trial. And it was about a man on trial and he was basically a go-getter, and some of the culture didn't like him. And it was just sort of this vitriol that goes on. And in the storyline, the way it went is the ending was up to the jury, whatever they decided. So it was written as a play. So it was on Broadway, and the whoever was the jury that night could pick the ending, and then the last, set or act was depending on what the verdict was. And so they turned that into a big balloon. And I remember the storyline was Babe Ruth one time was on the jury. He shows up, and then there were, stars, Charlie Chaplin, I think, showed up one time or whatever was in that era, but these, well-known people. So half the thing are people like, hey, we want to go see the night of January 16th because, so and so, Groucho Marx, whatever's on the jury. So they want to see, but the story was great. And it was a great artistic genius she put to it. Most of Rand's work, if you look at the Objective Institute, was about takers first producers and the philosophies of objectivism and all this other stuff. And people can get high and mighty, good or bad about all that. Alex Epstein used to work for that. He's a great advocate for, fossil future and moral case for fossil fuels. It's a lot of common sense. Let's apply good science and good information to that. And I bring all that up because of the train, back to the train. So you have this storyline in Atlas Shrugged with of them building a train line, and then the drama was all set around the rail industry. And that hit home, back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, because rail travel, you even go back to the gold miners and the 49ers and stuff, and the cornerstone of getting the rail to go across the United States was a huge deal in. Hey, see Rodrigo's Pinosa. Hi from Chile. Yeah, stay in touch, my friend. We've got some great plans for Chile and South America. Awesome stuff there in the Andes. I'd love to meet you sometime. Um, so why I bring that up is that rails connected societies. They moved goods back and forth. They've done a lot of things like that. And then, people think the pollution and the coal fired and diesel and just kind of, they don't like it. And the American rail industry's kind of got a lot of maybe corruption, high politics and who's moving what. And then people can drive trucking industries a lot bigger in North America. But there's something romantic almost about the rail lines. My late father loved rails, and when you think about it, when you have heavy industry, you like a rail siding, moving stuff back and forth and doing all this. And so what's happened and taken place for us is Concentric. And a lot of this kind of started with the Project Iron Boomerang. And those of you not familiar, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on that one, but we actually have an audio that we left here on our YouTube channel that is a presentation we made, and it's a great storyline there. There was a real visionary entrepreneur um, in Australia back in the 1980s and 90s who came around and said, um, "We've got in Australia," he was saying, "we've got like we're top one, two, three in the world in coal and iron ore." And what he said was, um, you've got if let's see if you guys are looking at me and you're looking at a map of Australia, you'd have the western side with the iron ore deposits and the eastern over in Queensland with all the coal. And right now you've got a lot of coal-fired generation. You got iron ore over here. Well, Australia's like 24th in the world in steel production, right? So they ship out their raw materials that are perfect. They've got the perfect high-grade coal for you know, refining steel, iron ore, and yet they don't make very much of it. And one of the reasons why is you got a continent divide 3,000 kilometers separating the two resources. So instead of doing something about it, and what this guy, his name was, hang on, Langdon. Let me pull this up. Because I want to tell you the name because I want to read you something about him because it was, and I'm going to tell you why this applies because it's come up now around the world. Because what we looked at, and I'm going to cut to the chase here in a minute and explain things and why what's coming around. The guy's name, and he kind of developed it, was Lang Hancock. He passed away in 92. So it was really in the 60s and 70s, 80s, he was really doing this. Lang Hancock first dreamed of iron boomerang in the 1970s. 4 decades later, his vision still lives. Headlong Concentric brings its manifestation. We're working on that with Shane Condon. Shane, if you see this, hope you're doing well. He's kind of the next generation, guy carrying the axe. Shane made a request to me. He has terminal cancer. He's doing a great job fighting it. But he told me, he said, I just want to see that this is going to happen, my dream and my vision. And he's trying to build a team down there. It's a it's a tens of billions of dollar project. In fact, it's $100 billion. And the challenge that we run into that is and the project is this: build a rail line across the country, bring half the iron ore one way and half the coal the other way, and put steel smelters on both sides, and then ship out raw material and do it state of the art stuff. So you're building good quality materials and you're doing it for Australia. You're helping Southeast Asia. It's not just sending all the raw material to China and doing their thing. And it's Newman to Abbott Point is the project. So we took a look at it and said, well, wait a minute, because there's two things that have hurt the project or not allowed it to happen. Australia's raised bonds and done things, and the government's gotten behind it and some not behind it, and just kind of stalemates. And the challenge we saw is that what takes place is a, it's energy, And whatever energy you need to run those trains, whether it's diesel fuel or an electric driven, you're going to have pollution associated with it, right? If you're going to have energy, you got to have pollution. Okay, keep that in mind. And the second thing was the other impact on the environment, running a rail over there. And you'd have the pollution along the way, if you have diesel locomotion. So we looked at it and said, well, wait a minute, let's recoil back. What if we have pollution free coal production, coal power generation, right? And then what if we ran a maglev train? And that kind of meant with, well, the rolled eyeballs of the old school people, but why not? It's more efficient. And then we priced out running a long transmission line that distance. And lo and behold, here's the catch again. You've heard me say it before. You have graphene as a byproduct from coal conversion, right? So you already have more efficient power generation to fuel run the whole, and then your graphene basically underwrites all of it, and you can ship it around and do your thing. And again, there's a lot of people, this, that, and the other about graphene. We're modeling low end pricing, lowest end of the markets, and it makes a difference. And again, it's a byproduct. It's not either or. See, that's one of the challenges. So many people can't get out of and this is what hits on the rail stuff. It's the deal about being a polymath, doing more than one thing at once. People think that's taboo. And I'll continue to fight saying you can't afford not to do more than one thing at once. And when you start to do more than one thing at once, those things get easier because all you're doing is taking the waste byproduct from one process, use it as a fuel for another. And by using the byproduct from one part of a process to make something better, you've eliminated all the headaches of trying to get rid of what was a problem. I'm talking about carbon dioxide, carbon credits, the noise, all the background, the greenwashing, everything else. What if you just converted it to algae biomass or moss biomass and then pyrolyzed it into graphene? Forget net carbon and carbon footprint and net zero and carbon this and that. We're talking about gross zero using carbon. Like we say on the video that Talita made a great one. It's right there linked on our all the websites to recarbonize. This decarbonization. You take carbon out of the picture, try living without carbon. I mean, give me a break. It's like, let's use it. And then all of a sudden you realize, wow, that takes away all these other problems, political, social, economic, everything else. We can actually use the feedstock. And so what happens is, and what I'm kind of at here, Project Iron Boomerang is a classic example where if you could do it cleanly and more efficiently and run this rail line so you have steel mills on both ends, you can change the economy of an entire continent because Australia's a continent. Still is. I know some say Oceania, whatever, but it's predominantly Australia, the landmass. And so we kind of learned the lesson. We ran the models on this for Iron Boomerang, and we've applied the same thing to uh, some other applications around the world that could use a rail line in different distances and everything else. Well, one has recently come up now, and where it is right here in East Africa, and I didn't really see it coming. I'd seen some write-ups on uh, uh, the uh, the hang on, Caesar Martin's trying to call me. He's a vice president in our company, and I'm just reminded him I'm on the podcast. Uh, um, Hang on one second. There we go, Caesar. If you guys don't know Caesar, get to know him. Awesome guy. Lives in Fortaleza, Brazil. Does a great job, and we're met him through some connections in the Middle East, and he jumped on board. And exciting stuff ahead. Um, so here's the deal: is we're down here um, in um, um, the Southwest Africa, and the reason we came here, we've got developments all over Africa. And I know you in East Africa, West Africa, everybody's like, when can you come? When can you come? We need you to come. All the different meetings and all the different things that need to happen. And we get that. And a lot of people new to this are like, well, why do you have to go and everything? Well, because these infrastructure projects require handshakes and looking people in the eye. And that's how we built our success before. And one of the challenges is that costs money, and so working capital, and that's where it's been like a sore spot, the Achilles heel, starting from zero just a couple of years ago in a world that has these needs. We put this great plan together, and we're still kind of eking that out. but you make decisions and you pull along investors, and we're grateful for the guys who've stepped up and what we're doing because we have real answers to real problems. And sometimes it's also advancement of civilizations. So here's what happened. I'm super excited about it. I want to share this because little did I know, well, there's actually, as some of you may know, there are Africa's got, you can read the statistics. It's mind-boggling. Like 50% of most everything in the world, or 60, double-digit percentages are here in Africa. And a lot of times it's in one nation. Like it was Zambia is like the or no, Rwanda. I think it's, yeah, Rwanda is like the number one producer of tantium in let me look this up. I just want to tell you some of these things. You start looking around and you're like, well, how does that work? And you think these are just small nations and they don't have much, but remember the scale is just huge down here. And I think, yeah, I just was looking this the other day and it struck me as it was amazing with Rwanda. Yeah, they are. They're the largest producer of, it's the three T's: tin, tungsten, and tantalum, which is coltan, which is a material that gets used in a lot of electronic devices and everything. Well, they have a couple large mines, and a large mine for those might have a 5 or 10 megawatt load. It's kind of like the world's largest organic oil refinery up in Arbuckle, California. That was a client of ours, Adams Oil. It's not a big refinery, but it's the largest organic oil refinery in the world. And we did a tri-generation plant for them years ago that won a bunch of awards and things. But what I'm referring to here is that you've got Botswana, especially, has large coal reserves and large copper reserves. So does DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo. So I saw headlines on LinkedIn and in the news releases and stuff that they're looking at doing this rail line from kind of eastern Congo over to the west coast to like Kinshasa. And okay, and then over also into Angola. It's like, okay, wow, that's going to be politically challenging. Got all the different strife, but cool. So keep an eye on that. So we come down to Namibia based on some other things that are even related to our solution here, where things start to pile up. And here's the exciting story, and keep your eyes open for this. You're hearing it kind of right here, and yet I'm kind of even late to the party, but it was sort of like they were waiting for us to show up because they're like, we need to do something. How are we going to really make this work? Because remember, my Australian analogy is that there are mining companies all over the world, and if you guys are involved in any of them, you know who you are, that have billions of dollars at your disposal, and you guys could snap your fingers and roll out the financing to do like a Project Iron Boomerang. It's $100 billion project. It doesn't mean it all gets paid for at once. You get stages, and the rail lines like 20, 30 billion of it or whatever. And all, it's a big money, but it's the way things get built. And the challenge there is that like the iron ore companies are like, yeah, we might dabble in getting a power plant under our purview to fire up the steel mill. And then the power plant guys over here, the coal, they're like, yeah, we might do some transport of the fuel, short distances, come from the mouth of the mine, whatever. And then the refineries are like, yeah, we might own, kind of like I said, the power plant associated with the mill, maybe some transport, but it's just kind of, we're not going to do this transcontinental multi-billion dollar rail line. So all the big players involved who need it are like, man, that's just outside of our bailiwick. So who's going to do it? And this is the big thing I have that's funny these days is that, if all the people who really had the capacity to do stuff like this were doing it, there'd be nothing left to do. And we can all think, everyone says, oh, Elon Musk, or, so like Dangote from Nigeria, Akili Dangote from the cement company, richest man in Africa. And then there's, um, the brand Charles Brand Richard Branson Charles Branson Richard Branson. There's wealthy people that can pull strings and get stuff done. And where are they? I applaud a guy like Elon Musk, for that he's doing something, with Tesla and with, SpaceX and everything. But there's some real needs out here. And I was a bit disappointed, but it's kind of telling. And I've said this before on multiple episodes where Elon Musk is with, he's got some Grok, data center there in the Southeast US where he had a chance to do a world-class combined heat power system, maybe even mix up some graphene, kind of really do it up and show the advanced way. And what did he do? He goes buys aftermarket gas turbines and just slings them in, simple cycle, no heat recovery, nothing, puts them in even without permits, people complaining, whatever. It's just this mad rush for power. So you just throw quality out the window. Didn't help the cause at all. Basically just said, well, I've got a lot of money, so I can just sort of bypass permits and do it after the fact. But if you're going to do that, why not do something really good, Elon? Why not go for the best? And what is the best? What are our systems? They're better than the standalone power systems, but they're based on that same equipment. We just capture all the waste and do something great with them. See, people forget that about Concentric. We started as a power generation company. We've done as many power plants as anybody in the world. Our stuff didn't just fall off the wagon. We said, well, what are you going to do with all the byproducts that are liabilities and costs? So we said, turn them into revenues. So here's the deal. This is what happened is there's a lot of entities that could step in the gap and get this stuff done. But the translation comes over here and why we're looking at Project Iron Boomerang is because we'll do that. We'll put a power plant in the coal, we'll run the steel mills, we'll take the waste heat and make graphene that can pay for everything, and we'll run a rail line. Because what's a rail line? It's basically a use of the electricity, right? Run a transmission line, use the power. See, that's what independent power producers kind of left the gate on. And one of the greatest ones, AES, Dennis Backey, one of my early mentors, they're still the world's largest independent power producer, but they don't get into what's being done with the electricity. They just sell it into a utility grid and call it good. Well, what if you could control what it gets used for? Oh no, that takes too much thought. Well, yeah, but it's fun and exciting because then you can really drive economies, right? So here's what's going on in this part of the world. I'll wrap things up here. We got about 20 minutes. Is on top of all this thing up in, I call it South Central Africa, South Central rain there through the Congo and stuff. And it's really we're learning kind of some political firewalls. It's really Uganda over to DRC and maybe up to Central African Republic and down to include Angola. Then you get into like Southwest Africa of Botswana, Namibia. I'm going to throw Zambia in that mix. I'm also going to I'm learning Mozambique there. South Africa's got a lot of real problems going on, the nation. But just to the north of them where we are, there's a lot of alignment happening. So these guys have come in and said, hey, we need a rail line, the Trans Kalahari Rail. Doesn't that just sound cool? The Trans Kalahari Line, TKL, and it needs to go from the copper mines over to the coast in the copper mines in western Botswana to the coast in western Namibia, Walvis Bay. And so it comes up in a dialogue where we were meeting with some officials and people connected to the president level type officials in Mozambique and Namibia, where we are, as well as um, in Botswana. And so we're here now. So it's like, oh, you can come to a meeting whenever we're here. And so what surfaced, it's a super exciting project. And I want everyone to be kind of aware of this and watch it because this is one of these things that there's going to be, I told the people involved, there's going to be a book or movies written about this one. This is like the frontier day. This is like pioneering time, what the United States went through on this, but we get to do it with ultra clean technologies that are just going to knock some economies out of the park here. So what we did is we just kind of dusted off the Project Iron Boomerang, which it was even more expensive because you had to take coal and iron ore across the continent 3,000 kilometers and then have the steel refineries on either end, which are a value add, but it adds a lot of capex. Here, they're just talking about moving the copper ore and the coal reserves to the coastline and shipping them out. And we'd already modeled Botswana using some of the coal and optimizing it. We'd already modeled Namibia using some of, they call it encroacher bush. They have 45 million hectares, the size of California, full of this it's not really an invasive bush, but there's not really a lot of use for it. But what can we do with it? woody biomass to make energy and graphene. Hello, indigenous fuel. All you got to do is go get it, and the ranchers want to get rid of it, right? And want to move it and do something with it. So we're moving on that. So then this rail line comes in. And what do they want? And we immediately said, well, start it back at the coal fields and we'll power it up with some coal plants on the, let's see, I'll look at a map again. Coal plants on the eastern side in, it's really kind of eastern Botswana, come down to Gaborone, and then from Gaborone cruise over to the border with Namibia and then down to the coast. And in my brain, as I'm talking through this, I'm already piecing it together. Like, this is perfect. We've already designed the power plants on the one end, and then we've got some other power plants now on the Namibia, and those can fuel the grid for a lot of other stuff, plus the maglev train, very efficient power generation and locomotion, the substations in between, everything. We've got all the price points for it because it's been done. You know, the Koreans have done a great job with maglev, and you just make it go longer by having substations like now the standards every 60 kilometers, you know, come down from 3,000 kV to 300, you know, run your medium voltage into the train itself and let it roll and not roll, but glide, you know, frictionless motion. And so it's really cool. Like, this is all set up pollution free because you got the power on the both ends. And what's exciting is it connects all the dots. You know, it's basically goes across both countries. And what's exciting for us is that this is already being it's already been deemed by the presidencies of both country like absolutely imperative. Like, this project has to happen. And they're doing feasibility studies and doing all this stuff, and it's cool, and we're going to get involved in that dialogue. But we just came and said, hey, with our financing channel that we've got with McKinley and with our engineering prowess, like, the feasibility's done. You know, I ran the numbers. It took me, I was excited. You know, it was one of those, I kind of dropped everything for a day and just modeled it out, and it's phenomenal. You know, where, and we could ship the graphene too, give us support for that. So I'm calling it right here. You're hearing me today. It's July 18th. By the way, I turned 58 tomorrow, July 19th. Talita and I are already kind of celebrating the birthday. We had a cake today, and we're going to go see the ocean tomorrow. And just, you know, it's just awesome. I mean, I feel like a kid in a candy store. But you heard it right here first on July 18th. I know we got limited viewers, you know, and this isn't, you know, this isn't like the million person podcast yet, but this will be recorded and put up there. I'm saying it right now, July 18th, 2026. The Trans Kalahari line and the copper power, emission free power, and the graphene from it are going to change the world economy. And we landed in the spot where everybody's like, this needs to happen. How can it happen? And what does Concentric offer? See, this is where it's different. We don't just come and say, oh, we're a vendor and use this turbine or engine, and we're going to try to sell some equipment and do a power plant. We can do that, and we will do that. That's what's needed. Somebody needs to just do the basics. But what did we do? We gave a polymathic answer that everybody's, and so far the officials involved on it are like, wait, what? You're gonna make more money off the byproduct of the power system than the whole rail put together, and that system's gonna power up the rail and add this graphene component where you'll have manufacturing hubs for it, and you'll move the coal. They have billions of tons in reserve that's being underutilized, plus the copper, and you've got cooperating governments and everything. And we've already run the numbers, and it's a phenomenal application. So even literally, like, next week, we're meeting with the ministers of transportation. I just sent them a letter with the links to what we're doing. And we can honestly go into those meetings and say, you need this done because you need it for your economies to be involved in mercantile commerce. And there's nobody in the world who can even have a chance to touch what we're offering because it's the best energy technology to drive everything that needs to happen, and it creates its own sub economy that's massive with this graphene component. Nobody's thinking about this stuff, guys, and you're hearing it right from me first. And I hope some of you get it, because what I just described here, I mean, think about it. You've got clean and efficient, pollution-free power using resources, you know, some encroacher, but Namibia doesn't have any coal. So they've been kind of importing coal and problems here and there. We're working on acquiring an old coal plant right in the middle of the country, right here in Windhoek, to then convert it to some encroacher bush, put a couple more in the system. We had six designed, so we'll allocate two of them to power up this rail. The power plants we have slated over in Botswana to power up the rail. This is like mix and match, pick and play. I mean, it's just all the pieces are there. It's just what flavor do you want? And I could say, yeah, you can have it any color you want as long as it's black, right? Henry Ford, or you can do anything you want with your carbon as long as it's carbon black. Well, in this case, it's like, man, we can have a field day, and we're talking major, multi-billion dollar infrastructure with less than a couple year type paybacks, all in. Like in our model, we have no revenues from the transport running the train. It's just the power, and the power is a giveaway. Graphene underwrites it all. It changes economies. And you know what the difference was, and what I'm getting at? We found a couple of countries that we're going to do this. This isn't just thinking about it, maybe just kind of a bunch of hot air. So who can do it the best? And I'm right here. We as Concentric are right here saying we can bring, and the groups we're working with, they've got like Exim Bank and other kind of, they got like 10 and 20 and 30% financiers, and they're looking for the other 60, 70, 80, and we've got a 90 percenter. So we're now finally working with some people that are in nations. They're like, yeah, we've qualified for 10, 20, 30, 40, 60% here and there. And we're trying to piece all the pieces together. And we're like, hey, we can bring in 90. Do you think between everybody else we can fill in the 10? And they're just like, when can we meet? We're on airplanes. We're coming. I mean, literally, I just got a message during this talk of like, you know, when can you come to Mozambique? Because eventually we'll tie the rail over there. I was looking at today, but I want to bring this stuff up because we are an infrastructure company, and this gets back to the old issue, and I apologize for it. That our goal with the blockchain was simply to raise a little bit of money to support our real developments, and somehow in there, even before the most recent stuff that went on in pumpbags.fm or whatever, and I'm not going to get into all the details. We've talked enough about it, but we thought that the idea was, hey, we got a real company doing this real stuff. We're going to go do more. Somehow I missold it. I take responsibility, still trying to learn the argo and the language and the vertigo and whatever else out of the blockchain space. But we were looking to raise working capital and seed money to get some projects going because we're going to do this. We've done it before and we're doing it again. And I think somewhere in there, it got into this race against time. And if we don't raise the capital by, a week from next Thursday, then the whole thing's a fraud and just crazy stuff. And that's not how it works because countries still need to do stuff. And you read in the headlines, like, oh, so and so, like the guy's got the coal. It was Frontera in America, just got a bunch of coal and BlackRock and stuff because they got a system that converts coal. It's a gas pyrolysis system that ends up making some liquid fuels and everything else. Well, they still have a solid left over. And we've written to them saying, we'll take it because we can pyrolyze it, make graphene, and make more money than everything else combined. And they're making big investments in, it, and that's great. Those guys have connections on Wall Street, whatever. And people say, oh, look, somebody beat you. No, they didn't. It's all good. We want advancement. There's room for all kinds of cool technologies. This whole thing where people are like, oh, it's this, them, or the other. There's 8 billion people in the world today. And like 7 billion of them don't have enough of their basic needs met. I mean, really like half, if you go by the Lunatic Express and Carl Hoffman, you've got, I mean, realistically, at least a third of the world lives on like below human, poverty line by an American standard, really probably more like half, and why? Why is that? Like Rudolf Diesel said, how do you tackle that technology and society problem? Well, you don't do it by taking people with good sciences and technologies and just getting in their kitchen and saying, hey, if you can't make $1 billion by a week from Friday, then you're just a fraud and it doesn't work or something. I mean, that's such a narrow view. And I'm just throwing this out there because if you're in the blockchain space, and we still are, we love the blockchain. We love what it can do, liberating money. If you're a guy who's a token holder, or you're looking at any of that stuff, I mean, come on, think at least in terms of a day. I mean, what's the lifespan of a human being? It's still the average lifespan for most civilized nation, like 70 years or whatever, right? 50 to 80 years is typical. Okay. So, I mean, it's amazing how people, especially I find them in the United States. I'm still a U.S. citizen, carry the passport, the whole deal. I love America. But come on, people, does everybody have to think like the high tech space? They sit there and act like they can't do anything unless it has a 47-second payback. And it takes them like, 11 months to build a new fab. And by the time they're done, the new next wafer size is out. So basically, when you say you can't do anything unless it pays for itself before it's being done, you're being a liar. That's just a bunch of crap. But that industry's full of awesome people. I have relatives in it working for Intel, and they're brilliant guys. And it's awesome. And I love Robert Noyce and Jack Kilby and a lot of the guys involved in integrated circuits. I mean, phenomenal. Even the software side of things, really. When you look at what Steve Jobs, and I don't care for the ethics of Bill Gates, but what he and Paul Allen did is phenomenal. And I love what Steve Jobs did and Wozniak's awesome. And those guys, because you know what they did? They saw a future that people couldn't even understand. Who's going to walk around with a computer? Really? Who's going to have a personal computer at home? But look what it's led to. I'm talking to you right now on an iPhone. How we can get this information out. And the idea is should spread good information faster. Instead, people get cynical. Don't be cynical. Be cynical enough to study and do the research and figure out what can be done, and then go do the homework. I find one of the challenges, and I recommend this just while I've got the soapbox, we got about 10 minutes here. I see a lot of people get some information, they run it past AI. I use AI because I ask it for statistics and metrics all the time. It's a great way to do. I tease them and say you're just a advanced browser. I'm not a browser. I'm a to Chat GPT or Gem or DeepSeek or whatever Claude. I mean, I've talked to all of them. And I'm not super proficient in them because I'm trying to navigate through and I'm like, look, just give me the metrics. What kind of power plants does this country have? And I just need the layout to plug into our model. And I got guys now we're working on having an app where you guys could look it up. Say how much megawatts do you need? How much MSW? How much garbage is available? And just plug one number in and the thing will give out a spreadsheet and give you information of what the cost would be and the simplified. And then you can call us up and say, we want one of those. It's going to be a cool app and we're working on it. It's really simple. We've done all the engineering already, so I'm using AI not for, I challenge it all. I get in arguments with it a lot. I'm like, just stop. I'm not asking for your opinion. And I have to remind it, our green tech systems and the pollution free. And it goes, oh yeah, and the algae recovery, and yeah, all the numbers work. The science is great and profound. I said, stop going down this path of how hard it would be to do all this stuff. I told Talita the other day, some people come to us and said, man, it's really hard to build all this infrastructure. You know who says how hard it all is all the time? People who've never done it. People who've never done any of this are like, oh, wow, that's hard. We don't get it. It sounds complicated. Well, sure, it does if you've never done it. But intelligent people realize that some other people, it's what they do. you know, I had a guy, people come and say all the time, like, well, that's not really my bailiwick. I'm not really into those things. What energy, food, air, or water? Which one don't you like? And people will say, I don't really know about a lot of those industries. And it's like, okay, but a lot of people do. And you'll find there's room at the top. A lot, especially this post-pandemic, the world is on fire looking for answers, and that's what we're doing. So I wanted to share that with you. We got MSW stuff in Mozambique. We got all the other projects across Africa. We're basically I'm in personal dialogue now with the richest man in Africa through some great connections and people we have. Planted amazing seeds up in Oman and in Georgia. uh, Fundamentally, if you track the sourcing of Concentric Industries, you know that we've got branch offices on 6 continents. We've made major presentations, proposals, and talked to government officials and industrial leaders in, I think, I don't know, 70 countries now. And we've got some great projects. Yes, we're kind of streamlining the capitalization. I think those days are done. We're finally talking to real people who are like, hey, we need a consortium and this stuff has to get funded. What can we do? And so we're coming in at the right place at the right time. But the exciting part is what's kind of evolved as this goes. We knew there'd be great places around the world and we could go serve any country. And that's why we put models together for them. But where we would land with kind of the core hub branch office locations, which are kind of following where Talita and I have lived and kind of set up shop for, at least several months, more or less in a row. And wherever we go, we still are servicing. When we were in Oman, we went to Indonesia often and over to Tunisia, Middle East and North Africa. When we're in Georgia, there's the, reconnaissance and the negotiations we were doing with from Mongolia all the way back to Turkey, right? The Silk Road. You can see the networks there. It's phenomenal what we've been working on. So this was really our first segue physically to get back to Africa. Tweet from South Africa. So she told me when I first met her years ago, I said, "Hey, all things being equal, where in Africa is the place to go?" And without even beating, I mean, just instantly, she goes, "I can tell you right now." Yeah, yeah, tell me. Botswana and Namibia. And here we are. So I was like, where? Like I kind of know on a map, there's Kalahari Desert, the Bushmen of the Kalahari. Cool, right on. What's up? When you find out they got great resources and common sense politics, people who've merged cultures, the old and the new, and they don't just genocide each other because of whatever. They're just trying to work it out. And here we are, cleaner and more efficient at the same time. And that doesn't, all you guys in Africa, if you're hearing this or whatever, it does not diminish at all what we're looking at in East Africa, the rest of West Africa, all these countries. Look at our map in there. In fact, just I think it was yesterday or the day before, yesterday. In fact, it might have even been this morning. No, it was yesterday, Friday. Um, I sent out to our guys over in Congo and in Uganda. We're calling it um, the ACCR, as I call it, the African Eight, South Central Africa. I call it. It's kind of from Uganda over to Congo. I mentioned earlier, and we finally got all those on the map. Looking at some different applications, and what are they here? It's the ARRC8, and we called it I'll tell you what they are. Let me load this up and you'll see it here. Hang on one second, and we'll wrap up here at 7. I might go a couple minutes late but I've shared pretty much everything I want to, and I wanted to convey that because this is real bricks and mortar stuff, guys. I mean, this is like where it's at, and we're now finally, thanks to some investors and what we're moving along with, in a position to just show up at the meetings on demand and be there and say, yeah, we can orchestrate this. Yeah, the African Resource Resonance Corridor, the ARRC8. So that's kind of this South Central. Then you got the West Africa as we go up. We're kind of down in this Namibia, Botswana pocket with uh, Mozambique over to the east. And we're tying a lot of things together, meeting a lot of high level people who are like, this stuff has to go. And so the best is yet to come. We keep saying that, and I mean it. I know that there's been angst on the part of a lot of people to say, when's Concentric going to get funded? When are you going to have dividends? All this stuff. Yes, it's a race for humanity to kind of solve these problems. On a corporate level, we've overcome and survived a lot worse. Okay. So we're here to stay. We're excited about everything going on here. And this is just super awesome stuff. And you guys, we love and appreciate everybody who's here. I love and appreciate even the people I disagree with. And some of you see, I get kind of riled up sometimes during the week. I'll see stuff and go, wow, how messed up is that viewpoint? I disagree with it and work on it. And that matters, because that it keeps us sharp, right? Sometimes the blunt force forces you to get better. And um, that's what it's about. So we're continually refining, but we're staying the course on who we are. And who are we? We're a bricks and mortar, real electricity, food, air, and water company. And Africa is ready to grow. I'll leave with this note. I mentioned before, this will give you a sense of scale. And those of you who are familiar with this, uh, and uh, the Iron Boomerang project I told you was 3,000 kilometers, right? Like 3,300. And that's across Australia. And I know that there's the Mercator projection distortion, right? Like if you're in around the equator, South America and Africa are basically way bigger than like Canada and Iceland and the tip of South America and Antarctica. The way the typical map works out, it really inflates the size of entities on the ends because the way I've been, Shabtai Levi made some great. Thank you. I'll look at that in just a minute. You bet. Thank you for that. That was just sent over about the rail line, but I can't open that. So thank you. I'll look at it in a minute here at the end of the talk. Thank you, babe. Just got a thing on the Trans Kalahari from the people there. It's going to be awesome as we look into that. So the point I'm making there is that in that Mercator projection, what happens is the distance the light travels for something on the poles to come out as the map kind of gets flattened out as it lights out of the globe distorts it. Whereas if you're right in the middle, it's just a straight shot with the light. I've seen it work. Imagine a globe and the light shining through it, and then it comes up onto the flat table. Well, the stuff on the ends on the poles has a way further way to travel. So by the time it gets up on the flat surface at the top of the table that then gets mapped out, it looks way bigger than it really is. So Africa's huge, but Australia is too. 3,300 kilometers. It's kind of like the size of America or whatever. And you think about that on a map. So I'm thinking to myself, hey, it's just Botswana to Namibia for this rail line. I mean, a few hundred kilometers, maybe 500, 1,000, over 2,000, 2,070 kilometers, just between two Western nations, Southwestern nations in Africa. In my mind, I'm thinking this is like Oregon and Washington, or maybe like Washington and Montana, including the sliver of Idaho there. And it's like, no, this is like the size of America between these two nations. And that's the scale of resources these places have. Even up in those of you who've been following in Sand Dune, if you're on here from Sri Lanka, I love you guys. We're going to do the energy crops. I mean, that's going to be a go. I mean, it's a no-brainer. We looked at a thing, graphite mines to convert graphite into graphene, which is one of the key sources. And this mine, this big project in Sri Lanka, had a 1 ton per day mine. We're like, wow, how are we going to make that work? We'll still do some energy production. Well, we found out where the real the graphite mines are. Over half the world's graphite's down in uh, oh, I'm just here. I just looking at it all day. I was going to say Madagascar, but no. Um, oh, help me out here. It's the the one I've just been mentioning about the landfills at their capital. It's in I'm sorry, folks. I'm just drawing a total blank on all the names come through. Maybe my age is catching up to me. Mozambique. Okay. Up in the north, they have like half the world's raw graphite. So they said, hey, we're struggling getting power generation in here, and we got a mandate to make some sellable products out of our raw resources before we ship them all overseas. And they've got standing offers from, I think it's Scotland and Ireland, to buy the graphite and process it there. And the Mozambique government says, but we're not going to ship any out until we can have a game plan where we use some of it. Well, guess what we can do? Use a slipstream of it to make power for your mines and make graphene that's going to exceed the value of everything else you're doing. Changes the equation, right? Why? Because we're polymathic. It's more than just power. So look for this rail line, couple thousand kilometers, awesome project. We're going to be talking through the major funding. It's about a $50 billion deal. Super excited about it. Super excited about what's going on. Thank you for listening. All the best from Namibia. Keep your eyes on Africa. The future is Africa. I know the future is Asian too. The Eastern Hemisphere is just loaded with life, a lot of cool things going on. But I can tell you this firsthand in my first week here. Um, and yeah, driving on the left hand stick shift and some neat things, kind of feeling like back in Britain or Australia, New Zealand, and a lot of things about the culture. This is, Windhoek's kind of like a Boise, Idaho, Denver kind of town, Bend, Oregon, maybe a little bit. But I'll tell you this thing, um, I love Africa. I told you as a young man, I read a lot of Ernest Hemingway as a student, and I kind of fell in love with Africa. Snows of Kilimanjaro, True at First Light, right? Some of those, the green hills of Africa. And, even in The Old Man and the Sea, and he said he dreamed about the lions. And it never really said where. Hemingway was great about giving some detail and then let the reader kind of figure it out. And I looked into that. And tomorrow we get to see the Atlantic coast here. They call it the skeleton coast because the cold water comes up and leaves a cloud cover. But it truly is a place where the lions actually come, and many times a year they can be seen up north here. They come down and hunt for the seals and stuff, but they're there on the water. And so there's stories of fishermen, young sailors and stuff who would see lions on the beach in West and Southwest Africa. So we're here. It's kind of like a homecoming in that regard. And again, this is just views from the moment. And you could go back and say, but I can tell you what I feel like right now is I feel like I'm home. And I'm home. It's a place in the world where there are massive needs. There's been massive conflicts, massive challenges, the whole ball of wax, the good, the bad, the ugly. It's all been here. And that, to me, that means you're alive. And I can tell you this, that Africa's alive. You see it in people's eyes. They want to do something. Maybe they don't know what to do, but they know there's got to be something different. And I'd like to believe that we are that different. Concentric represents different. And when you sit at the table with warriors, the conversation is always different. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week. Talk to you later.